I'll answer the question. You want answers?
I think I'm entitled.
You want answers?
Jonathan Karl.
Thank you, Mr. President. Senator John McCain and Senator Lindsey Graham both said today that they want to have Watergate-style hearings on the attack on the U.S. consulate in Benghazi, and said that if you nominate Susan Rice to be Secretary of State, they will do everything in their power to block her nomination. As Senator Graham said, he simply doesn't trust Ambassador Rice after what she said about Benghazi.
I'd like 5 days after the attack, the UN Ambassador Susan Rice appeared on all 5 Sunday talk shows, including this one. But on this broadcast, her interview was preceded by our interview with the new president of Libya, Mohammed el-Maghrib. I'm going to run a clip now of what he told us and what she said in response, which totally contradicted him. Was this a long-planned attack?
I think we have this leaves us with no doubt that this is pre-planned, predetermined.
What our assessment is as of the present is, in fact, what it began spontaneously in Benghazi as a reaction to what had transpired some hours earlier in Cairo.
You do not agree with him that this was something that had been plotted out several months ago?
We do not have information at present that leads us to conclude that this was premeditated or pre-planned.
Now, here is what Mr. Hicks said about Secretary Rice's answer that morning. He said, the net impact of what has transpired is the spokesperson of the most powerful country in the world has basically said that the president of Libya is either a liar or doesn't know what he's talking about. The impact of that is immeasurable. Maghrib has just lost face in front of not only his own people, but the world. My jaw hit the floor as I watched this. I've never been as embarrassed in my life, in my career, as on that day. I never reported a demonstration. I reported an attack on the consulate. Chris's last report, if you want to say his final report, is, Greg, we are under attack. It is jaw-dropping, that to me, how that came to be. Mr. Hicks went on to tell your investigators that no one from the State Department contacted him before Ambassador Rice's appearance. He said, I was personally known to one of Ambassador Rice's staff members. I could have been called. And you know, the phone call could have been, hey, Greg, Ambassador Rice is going to say blah, blah, blah. I could have said, no, that's not the right thing. The phone call was never.
He simply doesn't trust Ambassador Rice after what she said about Benghazi. I'd like your reaction to that, and would those threats deter you from making a nomination?
But let me say specifically about Susan Rice. She has done exemplary work. She has represented the United States and our interests in the United Nations with...
Sources tell CNN that Greg Hicks, then the #2 diplomat in Libya, will testify tomorrow that after the first attack on the compound in Benghazi, but before the second attack on the CIA annex, 4 U.S. Special Forces troops in Tripoli discussed reaching Benghazi in a Libyan aircraft. But the troops were told to stand down, to the dismay of their commander, who, according to Hicks, said, I have never been so embarrassed in my life. That a State Department officer has bigger balls than somebody in the military. Now, that flight left an hour after the second attack, so it's not clear that it would have made a difference, but it's also unclear why they were told not to go. Hicks says he thought it was a terrorist attack from the get-go, but the White House seemed eager to claim it was a protest of an anti-Muslim video, one that got out of hand.
The unrest we've seen around the region has been in reaction to a video that many Muslims find offensive.
The group around the Benghazi post was well armed. It was a well coordinated attack. You think it was a spontaneous protest against a movie?
Look, this is obvious.
Skill and professionalism and toughness and grace. As I've said before, she made an appearance at the request of the White House, in which she gave her best understanding of the intelligence that had been provided to
the State Department, who they have identified as Victoria Nuland, who is the spokesman for the department, sent a message they were worried that members of Congress would use the talking points to criticize the State Department for not paying attention to agency warnings about needing more security. And it was after that that these different versions of the talking points came in.
If Senator McCain and Senator Graham and others want to go after somebody, they should go after me. And I'm happy to have that discussion with them. But for them to go after the UN ambassador, who had nothing to do with Benghazi, and was simply making a presentation based on intelligence that she had received.
Claim the attack grew out of a spontaneous demonstration provoked by protests in Egypt. Greg Hicks told investigators that was simply not true. Part of what he said, Hicks, I thought it was a terrorist attack from the get-go. I think everybody in the mission thought it was a terrorist attack from the beginning. Question, did you ever have any indication that there was a protest, a popular protest outside the mission in Benghazi? Greg Hicks.
Besmirch her reputation is outrageous. And, you know, we're after an election now.
It is hardly the White House's favorite topic of conversation. The 4 Americans killed last September in Libya. Ambassador Chris Stevens, Information Officer Sean Smith, and former Navy SEALs Tyrone Woods and Glenn Dougherty.
But let's be clear. Benghazi happened a long time ago.
Not that long ago, just 8 months in fact, and still many outstanding questions from individuals with first-hand knowledge of the events. Former Regional Security Officer in Libya Eric Nordstrom last October testified about his request for 12 security agents. Why was this denied?
You know what makes most frustrating about this assignment? It's not the hardships, it's not the gunfire, it's not the threats. It's dealing and fighting against the people, programs, and personnel who are supposed to be supporting me. For me, the Taliban is on.
When they go after the UN ambassador, apparently because they think she's an easy target, then they've got a problem with me. And should I choose...
Charges that there have been threats, intimidation, and threats of retaliation. So let's discuss that. This week, a lawyer for one of the witnesses said that the State Department has threatened officials who wanted to testify. State responded and said they don't know of anybody who has requested to testify. Let's watch that exchange.
I'm not talking generally. I am talking specifically about Benghazi. That people have been threatened, and not just the State Department. That people have been threatened at the CIA.
And should I choose...
Question, may I get a word in here, please? Congressman, let me ask you a question, if I may. I want to talk to you about a controversy, a continuing controversy, about the talking points that came out afterwards that led, some people say, to a lot of disinformation. These are the talking points the administration put out after the attack. Steve Hayes of the Weekly Standard reports that the first draft by the CIA on September 14th said this: the crowd almost certainly was a mix of individuals from across many sectors of Libyan society. That being said, we do know that Islamic extremists with ties to al-Qaeda participated in the attack. This was the first draft of talking points for the CIA on September 14th. But after objections from state, and after the White House had a meeting, you can see the talking points, and it's a little hard to see there on the screen. There are lots of lines drawn through them. They were heavily edited, and all mention of Islamic extremists were taken out. Congressman Lynch, weren't the talking points the administration put out in advance of Susan Rice's appearance on those 5 Sunday shows, weren't those talking points scrubbed?
They certainly weren't accurate. I don't know what the process was there. But absolutely, they were false. They were wrong. There were no protests outside of the Benghazi compound there. This was a deliberate and strategic attack on the consulate there. So any statements that this was sort of like the other protests that we saw in Cairo and other embassies, this was not that type of case.
So briefly, and we're running out of time, Congressman Lynch, how do you explain the fact that that Sunday, UN Ambassador Rice came on this show and 4 other Sunday shows, never mentioned the al-Qaeda extremists, which had been scrubbed from the talking points, but did mention a reaction to the anti-Islam video, which had never been in any of the talking points?
Well, it was scrubbed. It was totally inaccurate. You're absolutely right. There's no excuse for that. It was false information. And what they try to do is harmonize what happened in Benghazi with what happened everywhere else across the Middle East.
And do you think part of that was...
I want answers! I want the truth! You can't handle the truth!